Hello and welcome to another session on literary criticism. Now we will begin with the formalist approach. New criticism, formalism, yes, those areas. As you may have studied or you will be studying about T.S. Eliot and his tradition and individual talents. And it is, you must understand that it is with T.S. Eliot and also his predecessor Matthew Arnold. With them begins the new form of criticism. If Philip Sidney is the one who started literary criticism in England during the Renaissance, it is rather to say Arnold and T.S. Eliot and F.R. Leavitt, I.A. Richards and F.R. Leavitt and all these people who began or who kick-started this wave of new criticism and also the theories that associated with it. But before we move on to new criticism, let's have a look at formalism first, because which came first is still can be still debated, whether it is formalism or new criticism. Both started together at the same time. We can say that both started together at the same time and both influenced each other and both had its differences also. So before moving on to new criticism, let's start with the formalist approach. So new criticism, formalism begins from there onwards. We begin theory. Okay, we begin we begin a scientific approach to criticism. Till now it was liberal humanist theories that you were studying. All these are theories. You studied up to Arnold and also T.S. Eliot, not up to T.S. Eliot, but up to Arnold. You have the liberal humanist theory, and soon with the coming of formalism and new criticism, we begin a new wave. We begin a scientific approach to criticism. So if we are to say which begins or where does it really begin, we would have to point out to structuralism, deconstruction. These are the ones where you have the real modern theories, modern concepts. So formalism and new criticism, though it is a modern concept and though it is a scientific approach to linguistics, scientific approach to the theory or approach to the discipline of criticism, it is like an in-between. Okay, so you have to study all these to have a better understanding of the theories in criticism, in literature. And also when it comes to your project also, you have to have a wider, or you'll have to have a good understanding of these modern theories. Okay, so let's begin. Formalism. Now, what is formalism? According to M.H. Abrams, formalism is an aesthetic tendency characterized by the separation of form and content of art and literature, in which the predominant significance is given to formal aspects, unquote. So what is formalism? Let's start to understand formalism. Russian formalism, but before we move on to getting to understand formalism, let's see what M.H. Abrams meant by those lines. Look at that last line of the quote. The predominant significance is given to formal aspects. So it's all about form. It is all about its formal aspects, and also it is a reference to the aesthetic tendency, aesthetic, appealing to the senses, which is characterized by the separation of form and content of art and literature. So form and content is separated, and what is given more importance here? The more importance is given to the formal aspect, how the text is written, the form in which the text is written. Okay, so we will be discussing all that in detail, but before that, let's get to understand, or let's have an understanding of the history of formalism, when it started and how it started. Russian formalism emerged as a school of literary theory from within two intellectual circles during 1915-1916. So two intellectual circles or two intellectual schools of thought are responsible for the emergence of this particular theory, Russian formalism. Okay, the first school, which was situated in Moscow, and the second one, the literary circle, that was situated in Petrograd, which is now known as St. Petersburg. The circle, or the people which constituted the literary circle in Moscow as well as Petrograd, consisted mainly of linguists, those who study language, and literary historians. And their main focus was to discuss and debate the essence of literariness of literature. What made literature literary? What makes literature special? What makes literature have its essence? The literariness of literature. In other words, what enables us to identify a work as literary? Why do we call it a literary work? Again, to quote Roman Jakobson, who was a very major Russian formalist, quote, "The subject of literary scholarship is not literature in its totality, but literariness, that is, that which makes of a given work of literature." Unquote. So what is literature? So the aspect of literature, or what makes literature literature, is its literariness. It is literariness and nothing more than that, that makes a given work of art literary, the essence of literature. Okay, the form in which it is written. Why do you call it a beautiful piece of literature? It's its literariness. I do hope that I'll be able to help you understand at least the peripheral level of critical theories. If you have any doubts, do feel free to ask me, or if you want me to just make things more clear also, you can just tell me when we take up these questions, or the questions in the discussion session. Russian formalists, they attempted to explore the literary quality of the work of literature. So again, what is this literariness? I have been speaking about literariness. You would be wondering, why? What makes a what is this literariness? Instead of speaking about literariness, what exactly is literariness? See, to understand literariness, I'll just tell you three important points, or three things that will help you to understand what this literariness is. First and foremost, if you want to understand the literary quality of the work of particular literature or a particular book, we need to have three things in mind. First one is the source of literariness. First point that you have to understand is literariness has nothing to do with the author, nor with the context, nor with his theme, or the subject of literature. Literariness എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഓഥറായിട്ടോ അതിൻ്റെ കോണ്ടെക്സ്റ്റ് ആയിട്ടോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ തീമായിട്ടോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സബ്ജക്റ്റ് ആയിട്ടോ യാതൊരു ബന്ധവുമില്ല. Okay? Second one. The second point is this, it is like interconnected. Okay, it is connected with the first point. It has a connection with the first point. Okay. The second point is that the source of literariness of a piece of literature is its language. So what is the source of literariness of a piece of literature? അതിൻ്റെ ലാംഗ്വേജ് ആണ്. അത് എഴുതിയിരിക്കുന്ന ആ ഭാഷ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അത് എഴുതിയിരിക്കുന്ന ഒരു ശൈലി. It's its language. What makes it literary is in its language. The third point is that this literary language is different from non-literary use of language. ഈ ലിറ്റററി ലാംഗ്വേജ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് നോൺ ലിറ്റററി ആയിട്ടുള്ള യൂസ് ഓഫ് ലാംഗ്വേജിൽ നിന്നും വ്യത്യാസമാണ്. The difference is caused by how language is structured in literature and how they follow a set of rules and laws. Now let us look at this logic or the logic behind these three assertions. Okay, what are the 3 points? The source of literariness is neither the author, nor the context, nor the theme, nor the subject. Then, second point, the literariness of a piece of literature is in its language. Third point, it is different from non-literary work. അപ്പോൾ ഇതിനെ നമുക്കൊന്ന് ഇതിൻ്റെ ലോജിക് എന്താണെന്നുള്ളതൊന്നുകൂടെ നോക്കാം. Now, let us try to look at the logic here. Okay? Why do these formalists assert that literariness can emerge only from language use? Let's take an example to understand it, or to understand what the formalist tries to tell us. For example, നമുക്ക് ഈ റൊമാൻറ്റിക് തിയറി ഒന്ന് എടുക്കാം. ലിറിക്കൽ ബാലൻസ് പഠിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ടാവണം. വേർഡ്സ്വർത്തിൻ്റെ ലിറിക്കൽ ബാലൻസിൽ എന്താണ് പറയുന്നത്? Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful emotion. It is the personality of the poet, right? It is subjective in nature, and it tells you it speaks about the personality of the poet. So if we are to follow this romantic theory, if we are to follow this romantic theory, to locate literariness in the personality of the author, I am speaking about romantic theory. Okay, if the romantics എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് വേർഡ്സ്വർത്ത്, കീറ്റ്സ്, S.T. Coleridge അവരൊക്കെ പറയുന്നത് എന്താണ്? ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ഓൾസോ ടു വിത്ത് ദ പേഴ്സണാലിറ്റി എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. റൊമാൻറ്റിക് തിയറിയുടെ മെയിൻ കോൺസെപ്റ്റ് എന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ ലൈസ് ഇൻ ദ പേഴ്സണാലിറ്റി ഓഫ് ദി ഓഥർ. ബട്ട് ഇഫ് വി ആർ ടു ഫൈൻഡ് locate literariness in the personality of a poet or the author, then we face a problem. And what is that problem? We will have difficulty in distinguishing between literary and non-literary creation of the author. ഇതിപ്പോൾ ഒരാളുടെ പേഴ്സണാലിറ്റി ആണല്ലോ. ഈ ആൾ എഴുതുന്ന ലിറ്റററി വർക്കും നോൺ ലിറ്റററി വർക്കും അതേ വ്യക്തിത്വം അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അതേ ആ ഒരു ഇൻഡിവിജ്വൽ തന്നെയാണ് എഴുതുന്നത്. ഫോർ എക്സാമ്പിൾ, വേർഡ്സ്വർത്ത് ആണല്ലോ മെയിനായിട്ടും റൊമാൻറ്റിക് തിയറിയിൽ വരുന്നത്. വേർഡ്സ്വർത്തിൻ്റെ പേഴ്സണാലിറ്റിയിലാണ് ലിറ്റററിനെസ് കിടക്കുന്നതെന്ന് പറയുകയാണെങ്കിൽ ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ഡിഫിക്കൾട്ട് ഫോർ അസ് ടു ഡിസ്റ്റിങ്വിഷ് ബിറ്റ്വീൻ ഹിസ് പോയിംസ് ആൻഡ് ഹിസ് ഗ്രോസറി ലിസ്റ്റ്. ഇത് രണ്ടും അതേ പേഴ്സണാലിറ്റി എഴുതിയിട്ടുള്ളതല്ലേ? വില്യം വേർഡ്സ്വർത്ത് തന്നെയല്ലേ അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ പോയോ എഴുതിയിട്ടുള്ളത്, അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ ഗ്രോസറി ലിസ്റ്റ് എഴുതിയിട്ടുള്ളത്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ലോണ്ട്രി ലിസ്റ്റ് എഴുതിയിട്ടുള്ളത്? അല്ലാന്നുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ വീട് പണിയുടെ കുറച്ച് ഡ്രാഫ്റ്റ് ഉണ്ടാക്കിയിട്ടുള്ളത്. എന്തെങ്കിലുമൊക്കെ ആയിക്കോട്ടെ. അപ്പോൾ how can we then distinguish between the literary work and non-literary creation of the author? So we have to let's come back to the first point. It is clear that it is not the poet or his personality that makes the work of literature literary. The first point, the source of literariness is neither the author, okay, nor the context, nor the theme, nor the subject. So the first point idana, in the personality allengil author, it is not in this, the source of literariness does not lie in the author. That's what the formalists say. So I just brought in romantics to make you understand the difference between the romantic theory and the, or what the romantics believe, and from that of the formalists. To the formalists, the source of literariness is neither in the author, nor the context, nor the theme, nor the subject. Okay, but the romantic theory on the other hand, it's all to do with personality of the writer. That is what, according to the romantics, that creates literariness, but the formalists are totally against it. They say it cannot happen, because if that is to happen, then how can we distinguish between Wordsworth's personality, because that same personality has written what? Both his poem as well as his laundry list or his grocery list. So we are not able to distinguish between his literary work and his non-literary work, because it comes from the same mind. They are products of the same mind, the same personality. So the first point is clear, I hope. Similarly, next is what? Nor the context, nor the theme, nor the subject. So similarly, a particular theme or a subject cannot also become the source of literariness of a poem. So if you are to look at, now again I'll give you an example. Subject. If it is as possible to write a medical thesis on the beating of a heart as to write a poem, if it is based on subject. Alle, heartbeat എടുക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ ഇതിനെ പറ്റിയിട്ട് ഒരു മെഡിക്കൽ തീസിസ് എഴുതാം വേണമെങ്കിൽ, അല്ല എന്നുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ നമുക്ക് ഇതിനെ പറ്റിയിട്ട് പോയം എഴുതാം. അപ്പോൾ ഇവിടെ സബ്ജക്റ്റും അത് ഒരു സംഭവമല്ല. So therefore the subject also is ruled out. The subject alone cannot help us to make distinction between literature and non-literature. Next one, the socio-cultural historical context. That is what I said by context. The socio-cultural historical context is also ruled out by the formalists. They say that is also not needed, because from the study of literariness, or from their study of literariness, you cannot arrive at whether the particular writing is literary or not. For example, this historical framework, if they are to speak from this historical framework, this historical framework has produced both literary as well as non-literary pieces. So the context too cannot determine its literariness. In the history you don't just have literature alone. There are travelogues, there are discoveries, or there are various books on discoveries other than the books that are on literature. So again, if you look at it from the historical milieu, that also cannot be judged as literary. So what is finally left that constitutes a poem or a literary work? Now remember, we shall be focusing more on poem from the formalist side than prose. For formalists, it's all to do with poetry than prose. Okay, so what constitutes a poem in its basic and most physical form? They are nothing but the words on the page. വാക്കുകൾ മാത്രം, the form in which it is written, the words, the basic thing. But again there is a problem. Language used by a poet to create poetry is also different by him, or is also used differently by him or her to speak about more mundane things, ordinary things, which are not counted literature. So അപ്പോൾ വാക്കുകൾ മാത്രം ഉപയോഗിച്ചിട്ടും കാര്യമില്ല. ലാംഗ്വേജ് മാത്രം അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ആ വാക്കുകൾ മാത്രമാണ് ലിറ്റററിനെസ് കൊണ്ടുവരുന്നതെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ അതും തെറ്റാണ്. എന്ന് വെച്ച് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ ഈ ലാംഗ്വേജ്, ഇപ്പോൾ എനിക്കൊരു കവിത എഴുതണം, ഞാൻ കവിത എഴുതുന്നു എന്നും പറഞ്ഞുകൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ ബാക്കിയുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങൾ, എൻ്റെ ഓർഡിനറി ആയിട്ടുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങൾ ഞാൻ സംസാരിക്കുന്നു. ഐ സ്പീക്ക് ടു മൈ ഹസ്ബൻഡ്, ഐ സ്പീക്ക് ടു മൈ ചിൽഡ്രൻ, ദേ ആർ നോട്ട് പോയറ്റ്, ദോസ് ആർ നോട്ട് പോയട്രി. ഐ സ്പീക്ക് ടു യു, റൈറ്റ്, ദാറ്റ്സ് നോട്ട് പോയട്രി. സോ ഇറ്റ്സ് മോർ ടു ഡു വിത്ത്, അതേപോലെ തന്നെ ക്ലാസ്സിൽ സംസാരിക്കുന്ന രീതി വേറെ. നമ്മൾ പുറത്തിറങ്ങുമ്പോഴത്തേക്കും, നിങ്ങളെ കാണുമ്പോഴത്തേക്കും, പുറത്ത് വെച്ചിട്ട് കാണുമ്പോഴത്തേക്കും നിങ്ങൾ ക്ലാസ്സിൽ പോലെ അല്ലല്ലോ സംസാരിക്കുന്നത്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പോയട്രി അല്ലല്ലോ എക്സ്പ്ലെയിൻ ചെയ്യണം. അവിടെ ഒന്നും കൂടി ഓർഡിനറി ആയിട്ടുള്ള നിങ്ങളുടെ കാര്യങ്ങൾ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ എന്തൊക്കെയുണ്ട് വിശേഷം എന്നൊക്കെയല്ലേ ചോദിക്കുന്നത്. സോ ലാംഗ്വേജ് ഓൾസോ കെൻ നോട്ട് ബി ടേക്കൺ ഓർ കൗണ്ടഡ് ആസ് സംതിങ് ദാറ്റ് കോസസ് ലിറ്റററിനെസ്, ഓർ ദാറ്റ് ക്യാൻ ബി യൂസ്ഡ് ഇൻ ദ ഫ്രെയിംവർക്ക് ഓഫ് ജഡ്ജിങ് എ ലിറ്റററി വർക്ക്. A poet, when he talks with his or her parents, friends, relatives, they use this very language in different ways. They use it to speak in or write poetry, and also to speak to their friends, relatives, and so on. So here the formalist will argue that what makes the language of his or her poetry literary or different from his or her non-literary use of language is the special words he or she uses in the language of his or her poetry. So it's not just language, but the special way in which language is structured. Okay, so what is the primary focus of Russian formalists? So the primary focus of the Russian formalists boils down to this issue of how language is uniquely structured in literary works, which makes them identifiable as literature. Okay, the structure of language, how uniquely it is structured, which makes them identifiable as literature. So it's not just, it has nothing to do with the author or the context or the or the theme or the subject, nor does it have to do with the language alone. The second point, it has to do with the language. And the second point, literariness is based on its language. But again there is a small problem. Language, everything cannot be literary. So then it boils down to this, that the language should be used in a specific way to make that particular work of literature literary. അത് ലിറ്റററി ആവണമെങ്കിൽ ആ ലാംഗ്വേജ് ഒരു സ്പെസിഫിക് ആയിട്ടുള്ള രീതിയിൽ വേണം ഉപയോഗിക്കാൻ. ഋഥമുണ്ടാവണം, അതിലെ വാക്കുകൾ, the images must create or touch the sense. It should have an aesthetic quality, and so on. So what are these things? These are all forms. The way in which language is structured, the way in which words are structured. And since the effort of the formalists was to turn literary theory into the science of literature, their exploration of the structuring of literary language took the form of finding the rules that shaped and controlled structuring process. So it was all to do with science of literature. So it was for the first time that science was used, or literature was looked from a scientific lens. It started with T.S. Eliot. You have studied that in Tradition and Individual Talents, a catalyst for experiment or the formula. And how the catalyst is unchanged or remains unchanged. That's the personality of the mind or the poet. The personality of the poet shows that there is no reaction, or there is no reaction in the catalyst, whatever it is used. It's a platinum that is used there. So there is no change. So Eliot speaks about the impersonality of the author. So from that onwards, you have what? You have the formalist and their theory or their effort in turning literary theory into science of literature. They were trying to find rules that shaped and controlled the structuring process. What structuring process? The structuring of the language to make it literary, and that too in a scientific way. Okay. Now the two major, let me just give you some few important, very important writers of formalists. They were Victor Slowski and Roman Jakobson. Victor Slowski, okay, and Roman Jakobson. So what is formalism? Formalism was all about forms, how the language was shaped, the rules it took, the structure used, the metaphors, the similes, the personifications used, that made a work of literature different from non-literary and ordinary language. Now I want you to just listen to this small section to understand what we studied. It's from Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. The novel begins, the introduction or the novel begins like this. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. So this is how Dickinson begins his novel, The Tale of Two Cities. So this is one instance to understand the literariness of language. Now let me ask you, see, I'll give you a poem, a piece of poetry also, so that you'll be able to understand, because formalists were mostly into poems than prose. I had this book with me, like in front of me, so I thought I'll just share this. Anyway, look at the way it is structured, how the language is structured. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Okay, antitheses, the opposites, two contrasts are brought here. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. See, it was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. See how there is a repetition also. It was. And there is also a rhythm in the sentence, right? So it's not just in poetry that you have rhythm in prose also. There's rhythm in the sentence. It was the best of time, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. Of course, it is, again, English is mostly in iambic pentameter. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. So there's a rhythm also created. Then that brings out the beauty of the sentence. So there is a literariness here. And how do you judge this literariness? In the way the language is structured. Now compare this. To make an omelette, you will need eggs, onions, tomatoes, green chilies, ghee, and some salt and pepper. Take a pan, heat the pan, pour some oil, and once the oil is heated, eggs and the onions and the green chilies and the tomatoes, put some, sprinkle some pepper, and your omelette is ready. Do you find any literariness here? You might have okay, do you find any literariness here? No, you don't. So this is the difference between a literary work and a non-literary work. In a literary work, it is the way the language is structured, a specific way to create an aesthetic effect. It's all to do with the form of language, the form in which the words are structured. Okay? Now I want you to just listen to Ode to Autumn. Ode to Autumn. Season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run, to bend with apples the most cottage trees, and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core, to swell the gourd and the plum the hazel shells with a sweet kernel, to set budding more, and still more later flowers for the bees, until they think warm days will never cease, for summer has overbrimmed their clammy cells. So this is the beginning stanza of Ode to Autumn, where the poet beautifully pictures the early autumn. Season of mists. So from this word season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, we get to understand the time and also the climate of the year that Keats is speaking about. It is a time. The time is that of mist or season. It is a season of mist, and it is also a season where both the autumn season as well as the sun, they are working. They are close friends, they are close bosom friends, it seems. So see the word close bosom friends. So from that word close bosom friends, we get to know that they are close friends, autumn and the sun. They are both conspiring. Look at the word used, conspiring. They are having a conversation. Goodalojaneyanu. Enthinteyanu? എങ്ങനെ ഒന്നും കൂടെ ഭംഗിയാക്കാം, ഓട്ടം സീസണിനെ എങ്ങനെ ഒന്നും കൂടി ഭംഗിയാക്കാം, നേച്ചറിനെ നോട്ട് ഓട്ടം സീസൺ, നേച്ചറിനെ എങ്ങനെ ഒന്നും കൂടി ഭംഗിയാക്കാം എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. They are conspiring, they are speaking to one another, they are best friends, they are close friends. They are conspiring with how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run. Thatched houses in England. Thatch means that the houses that are the roof that are made out of weed like plants. നമ്മുടെ ഇവിടെയൊക്കെ ഓല മെടഞ്ഞ വീടുകളെ പോലെയൊക്കെ തന്നെയാണ് അത്. അപ്പോൾ thatch eaves എന്ന് വെച്ച് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ the bottom part of that roof, അതിലിങ്ങനെ മുന്തിരി വള്ളികൾ ഇങ്ങനെ അവർ കയറ്റി വിട്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ്. So the autumn season and the sun is conspiring how to fill these vines, the grape vines, with lots and lots of grapes. How to bend the apple trees. The apple trees are bending. To bend with apples the most cottage trees. To bend them. Because of the heaviness of the apples, the apple trees are bending. They are very heavy with these apples. They are ready to they are almost ripe, ready to be plucked. So how do we get to enjoy this poem? From each word in it. Each word brings out an aesthetic quality that helps us to understand and also enjoy the poem. How the words are structured: season of mist and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom, friend of the maturing sun. And also, if you look at the second stanza, you will find personification. Who hath not seen thee off amid thy store? Sometimes whoever seeks abroad may find thee sitting careless on a granary floor. So what is Keats talking about here? He's talking about season. Season is given human-like quality. So there is personification here. So that's what I was talking about. Formalism to the formalist, it has nothing to do with Keats. It has nothing to do with the time in which Keats lived. It has nothing to do with the melancholy of Keats. It has nothing to do with his sensuousness. It has nothing to do with anything about Keats or his subject. Okay, it has nothing to do with the context. Everything has to do with how the words in the text, in the poem, are structured. Okay, how it brings out the meaning of the text through the words. Okay, it's not about what theme the poet speaks about. What is the theme here? The theme is that of melancholy. The theme is that of death. Okay, no, nothing of that sort. Here, the formalists, for them, everything is to do with the form. It is through the form that you get to to understand the poem. Okay, through the poem we understand that when if you are to take the theme, for instance, the theme is about death and perhaps rebirth. How do we understand? We don't understand it from Keats. We understand it from the way he has structured the language. So in the first stanza, it is all about early autumn. So if you look at the last line, you have already studied this. That's why I took this poem. If you look at the last two lines of the first stanza, until they think that warm days will never cease, for summer has overbrimmed their clammy cells. So it's all, they're speaking about the bees. From the bees, you understand the overconfidence of the bees. The overconfidence of the bees, because they feel that there is flowers in plenty. They feel that this summer season will never end and they will have enough and more honey, or they'll be able to gather nectar from flowers which are ever blooming. There are thousands of flowers have bloomed. They think that this season will never end, and they are overconfident. So here there is a caution. So from the word, how do we understand that there is a caution here? The caution is from the overconfident bees. Until they think warm days will never cease. The bees, they feel that the warm days will never cease, but they will. It's human, it speaks about mortality, right? Every season will not remain the same. It will keep changing. And also, the bees also, it speaks about mortality or death. Nothing is permanent, right? So from these words, what do we understand? We understand the caution that the poet is giving us, or the poem is giving us. For the formalist, it has nothing to do with the poet. It's all to do with the form, or it's all to do with the words in this text. Everything is to do with how the word is structured and how it brings out the meaning. So nothing is outside the text. For the formalist, nothing is outside the text. Everything is inside the text. The same is the case with new criticism also. When we come to new criticism, you will understand that they both have similarities. Both are speaking about text being autotellic. What are autotellic texts? Everything is within the text, nothing outside, nothing to do with the biography of the poet, nothing to do with the historical context in which he lived, nothing to do with the subject that he's talking about. It's all to do with how the poet has written that particular poem, or how the poem is structured. Let's leave the poet. How the poem is structured, the language is structured, how the words are structured. So there is a scientific study here. Okay, so hope I'm clear to you. Thank you. We'll stop here. So thank you and have a nice day.